afterwards. So just to give everybody that notice up front. The other thing that we always try to do is reference the IPR policy of the IDSG. I believe the Rules of Association recommend that we do that before the start of every meeting. So just referencing, for those of you who are on your computer, it's available on the website at www.idecosystem.org/IPR policy. And with that, I believe that that's all of the formal announcements. I have one person, okay, who's having trouble with sound. So Laura, perhaps you can help. Thank you. So with that, that's all the background. Thank you for putting up with all the logistics and technical information, and we can go ahead and begin, Bob.
Okay, thank you, Kay. So just to reiterate the 2 points that Kay just made, it's important to note that we are recording this session. If you are uncomfortable with being recorded, your recourse at this point is either not to speak during the meeting or to disconnect from the meeting. We record these meetings for the purpose of making the meeting materials accessible to people who, for one reason or another, can't join us live in real time in accordance with the transparency requirements that we have imposed upon ourselves as an organization. It's also important to note that we have an intellectual property rights policy. Basically, anything that you say as a contribution to our deliberations, you grant us a right to use. So once again, if there's anything that you're uncomfortable with contributing to the IDESG, please don't contribute it. Welcome to this online plenary meeting. There is no need to count quorum at this meeting because we will not be taking any actions. We won't be holding any votes or consensus calls. The purpose of today's meeting is to put before the membership of the organization the draft recommendation of the Management Council and its subcommittees on how, as we go forward and transition to a self-sustaining organization, we intend to support ourselves financially. So what you are going to hear today is not a draft which requires your action. It is a draft which requires your mature deliberation and your feedback to the Management Council in case there's anything in it which you are uncomfortable with. At the conclusion of today's meeting, and by the way, during the meeting there will be time for discussion and comments, and those comments will be taken into account by the Management Council. But of course there will also, as usual, for our procedures, be a period during which you can go back and study the documents that are going to be placed before you today and provide feedback based on some time for reflection to the Management Council before the final draft recommendation is put in front of you. So we have an agenda to go through today, and to start that agenda, I would like to hand the microphone over to Jeremy Grant of the National Program Office, who's going to talk to us about the possibilities for additional government funding. And I guess as a preface to this, I'll say it is our hope that any money that we use to sustain ourselves, that we gather by charging membership fees and by engaging in other income-producing activities, will be supplemented by grants going forward from the federal government and perhaps from other organizations. But hope is not a plan, so we need to be aware of the possibilities of funding, but we also need to be aware that sort of at a bare bones, keep the lights on level, we need to have a sustainable income stream, and the proposal for that will be presented to us a little later. So Jeremy, over to you to talk about funding.
Sure, appreciate it. Everybody can hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the background also of how we got here, in part because as I'm looking at the folks we have online, I know some of you were with us from the start and others have perhaps joined the IDSG at some point in its progress. We made the decision, I shouldn't say we made the decision, but we actually funded the Identity Ecosystem Steering Group back originally in July of 2012 with the award of a 2-year grant for about $2.5 million. That was then supplemented with an additional $625,000 about 2 months ago to ensure that there were sufficient funds to have the organization be in a very robust state for the full 2-year period. The reason that NIST put this initial seed funding, if you'll call it, forward was pretty simple. First, we wanted to provide funds to actually catalyze the formation of the steering group, which was something that its creation was specifically called for in the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace. We actually spent a lot of time after the strategy was issued reaching out to a lot of different stakeholders to get people's views in terms of, what sort of organization should we form here? How should it be set up? We had a number of workshops and also conducted a formal notice of inquiry asking, among other things, if any stakeholders thought that there was an existing group that was out there today that could actually tackle the tasks of the Identity Ecosystem Steering Group that the NSTIC called for. And while we had a lot of great responses and input and suggestions in terms of how to create it, it was actually very interesting to us that nobody came forward from an existing group and said, we think we're the ones who can take this, you don't have to create a new group. And that, of course, made it clear from where we sat that you needed to have a new group, both with a mission that would be broad enough to tackle all the different things that NSTIC is looking to do, as well as to ensure that you had a neutral ground which would not be perceived as slanting the activities of the organization in one way or another because of the interests of existing stakeholders. And it was also quite clear that for this new group to be created, our office would have to spend quite a bit of effort and some dollars in making it so. Second, we thought it was quite important if this was a brand new organization, then we did everything we could in the initial days as well as going forward, but particularly in the initial days to remove barriers to participation. Having been in the private sector and understanding how hard it can be for a lot of companies and other organizations to try and find money to join this brand new group whose mission and membership and other particulars were still being worked out, we thought it was quite important to invest dollars through a grant to essentially get this group kicked off and allow it to have some run room for a certain period of time in order to get its activities off of the ground. But as we made clear back in the early days, and want to reiterate today, part of the promise of this public-private partnership from the start was the expectation that the private side would find a way to take over both in leadership as well as in funding as quickly as possible. Government, because we have wanted the NSTIC to be privately led, never intended to pay for the existence of the steering group forever, and tried to make quite clear from day one that we expected that by the time the 2-year grant that we had made concluded, and that is scheduled to wrap up in the middle of next summer, the private sector membership, being all of you and others, would find ways to transition the organization to one that's self-sustaining. So we were really excited to see just a few weeks ago that members voted to move forward with plans to incorporate the Identity Ecosystem Steering Group as a not-for-profit corporation. And of course, today's call is to talk about the other thing that comes with that, which is actually raising the funds to drive it forward. Now, to be clear, while the initial NIST grant will run out next summer, NIST is very interested in continuing to support the work of this group, and we're exploring a few different options for potential follow-on grant. But part of our ability to put additional funds forward is really dependent on the steering group itself demonstrating that there is a commitment from the private sector to take the lead, including in the means of actually providing financial support on its own to the organization. We're looking, very much in our status reports to those who we report to, both on the Hill as well as in the administration, at key success metrics. And I can't, quite state strongly enough, the ability of the organization to really stand up on its own 2 feet is a metric that then demonstrates the private sector has taken this over. That actually then creates a much stronger business case for our office to then look to do some sort of follow-on support for the organization. So we're looking at a few different options right now in terms of, assuming that this group does move forward with raising funds and at least can raise enough to I guess, do the keeping the lights on activities, if you will. In addition, we hope there's enough funds to support active, programs, but looking for ways that we could support some of the program activities for the Identity Ecosystem Steering Group with a follow-on grant. There's precedence for this. I've talked many times before about how a lot of the model in terms of what NIST has followed here has actually followed closely what NIST did in helping to stand up and then transition to the private sector, the Smart Grid Interoperability Panel, where after NIST funded the initial round of existence of that solely with NIST dollars, the group incorporated, started charging membership fees, and then NIST has followed up with some grant support really to provide program management and technical expertise that can help the organization accelerate the pace of producing deliverables. It's really clear that each of you who's on this call is doing this on top of another day job that you have, sometimes 2 or 3, and you can get far with an all-volunteer effort, but you can move much farther and quicker at times if there is actually some stronger professional support behind the scenes who can facilitate activities in the different committees that are out there and help to drive deliverables sooner. And so in that regard, I think what we are looking to see here today and in the weeks to come is that the Identity Ecosystem Steering Group Incorporated is able to raise sufficient funds to make the transition, and then we can come out with an opportunity to provide additional resources to the organization. Just to be clear, anything that comes out would be fully competitive, which would mean that either IDESG Inc., as it's known, or other organizations could compete to provide this sort of support toward the organization, and because everything the government does has to be competitive, this is an area where we might actually see some others come in. But either way, it's the fact that there would actually be fees being collected, that the organization would be standing on its own, really gives us a lot more running room to be able to move forward with continuing to provide a significant level of investment to the group's activities. So with that, I can hand this back to Bob and Kay. And I'm also happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jeremy. So Kay and Laura, since I'm not on the web channel, I can't see any of the little blue man hands in the air. So Kay, I'm going to rely on you to tell me whether there are questions either in the chat box or people with their hands raised.
Not at the moment that I can see. So simple chats that I've been able to answer. So I think actually for the moment, hopefully we'll have more questions as we move on. We could move on to the next speaker if you like, to Peter Brown.
Well, we'll do that in a minute. So I just want to remind everybody, because maybe not everyone was on when Kay went through the technical procedures at the top of the call. Your lines currently, for the majority of you who aren't speakers, are on mute. If you have a question or a comment, you have 2 options. The first is that you can get in touch with Laura Barman via the private chat mechanism and ask her to connect you to the audio channel for the purposes of making a comment or asking a question. The other option that you have available to you is to use the chat box and chat to preferably everybody to ask the question. And if you do that, Kay will repeat your question to whomever it is directed to. So Kay, do we have any questions for Jeremy?
No, we do not.
Okay. So Jeremy, thanks very much for that. I think that is a really clear summary of the government's expectations of the organization going forward, and how we can best position ourselves to receive ongoing support from the NPO and potentially also from other organizations. So next, we are going to hear from Management Council Chair Peter Brown, and Peter is going to tell us about the process that the Management Council is using to come up with recommendations for a fee structure. And I should be clear about the process going forward here. So the discussion today is intended to inform the plenary audience about the Management Council's thinking at this time. following the conclusion of this call, there will be a comment period, and the purpose of that comment period is for anybody who has concerns about the proposal to take those concerns to the Management Council so that they can take them into consideration as they make their decision on the fee structure going forward. The decision will be made ultimately by the Board of Directors of the new incorporated entity, which is the same people as the Management Council, and the Board of Directors and the Management Council under both standard incorporation law and under our rules of association has the fiduciary responsibility for the corporation. So it's appropriate for the Management Council / Board of Directors to be the organization that makes that decision. But of course, in the context of the way we always do business, it is also absolutely appropriate for all of you in the plenary, if you have concerns, to take those to the Management Council and have them considered before a decision is made. So without further ado, I will hand the microphone over to Peter Brown to fill us in on how this decision has been made, and or the decision, how the proposal has been drafted, and how the decision will be made. Peter, are you on the line?
Yes, I am, Bob. Thank you.
I can hear you. Please go ahead.
Right, thank you. So as Bob's already given a little bit of the background, I won't labor the points there. The presentations we're going to do today are actually in two parts. I will, first of all, give some background about how we got to where we are today, and then Kim Little, one of my colleagues on the Management Council, who's done a lot of the, has led a lot of the work on the requirements for transition and also the issues around discussions on management of the new organization, as well as the financing of the new organization, including the membership fees. Kim will go into more detail on the actual specifics. So what I want to do is just take a few minutes in introduction to explain what's been going on in this period of transition. As both Jeremy and Bob have already hinted, we are in the middle of quite a considerable transition from what is essentially been a unincorporated, member-driven organization that was set up at the first plenary meeting in Chicago in August last year, and is moving towards being an incorporated entity. Now, what we have in this process is essentially a sort of meeting of a bottom-up and a top-down process. The bottom-up one, the members met in Chicago. They drafted, considered, and approved first interim and then more definitive rules of association, which determine the responsibilities of the plenary, the election of the Management Council, and the responsibilities, respectively, of the plenary and the Management Council. What we have now in the process of incorporation is somewhat a top-down approach, in the sense that there are requirements of law in order to be incorporated and in future recognized as a not-for-profit tax-exempt organization, which means that the process has gone somewhat in the other direction. We start with a set of articles of incorporation, bylaws which have to be approved by an initial board of directors, and then bring in the broader work of the plenary and the rules of association. What we've tried to do in that transition is to make that as bump-free as possible. That said, there are small bumps in the road still, which we're trying to handle as elegantly as possible. And the commitment we gave and that we are honoring is that the new board of directors in its responsibilities will match as much as possible the spirit and the letter of the rules of association in taking the organization forward. So what we have at the moment is something of a two-headed beast, because we have both the Management Council as elected by the plenary earlier this year, and the requirement for an initial board of directors, which is essentially composed of the elected members of the current Management Council. We have an initial board of directors, which has had to be nominated in line with the tabled articles of incorporation, and that body has yet to meet officially. We had an informal first briefing from external legal counsel, so briefing and orientation for the new board, going over various aspects of corporate law and the responsibilities, fiduciary responsibilities of the new board. And this new board will have its first formal meeting next week, when it will start the process of dealing with the transition of responsibilities from the current management council to the board for the IDSG Incorporated. In that light, and as I stated at the last online plenary, which was originally scheduled to be in-person plenary in Washington, D.C., and for various reasons, we moved to an online formula. I stated categorically there, and I think I have the full support of the Management Council in saying this, that we are intending and will honour the clear separation of responsibilities between the plenary being responsible for all policy aspects and the content of the work of IDSG going forward, and the board's limited but nonetheless important responsibilities as determined by law for the overall governance, management and fiduciary responsibility of the organization. With that in mind, and if we could look at the second slide, yeah, thanks, Kay, the specific work to be done in terms of for the new IDSG Incorporated body has been, a lot of the preliminary work has been done by the Management Council and its subcommittees. The Management Council already reported to plenary and gained plenary endorsement for the approach we're taking in terms of incorporation as a not-for-profit organization, and we agreed to come back to the plenary with further details about our recommendations and ideas regarding the funding of the organization going forward. Now, in terms of the transition, we have technically an awkward issue to deal with. In practice, I think it's not going to be so problematic, and that is if the new IDSG Incorporated is to be funded in future, it needs members. If to have members, it needs to have a structure and a membership agreement. And what we've agreed in principle is very simply to honour the current membership agreement, to transfer all of the provisions of that membership agreement to IDSG Incorporated with effect of 1st of January next year. And the only addition that we are proposing in that membership agreement is a reference to a possible future membership fee. So opening up that possibility for a fee-based funded organization. So the new board of directors will be meeting, as I say, next week, and we'll probably meet again before we meet in face at the plenary in January. But basically, we wanted to move ahead with the transition of the membership agreement so that we actually have members of the new organization that are able to meet in plenary in January and agree the various aspects of the work going forward. So the issue about membership fees, and Kim will go into this in more detail, obviously, in her presentation, but where we've started from is, first of all, a principle, which is that as a not-for-profit organization, as an incorporated organization, we ultimately want to stand on our own 2 feet, and that requires us weaning ourselves off support from external agencies. Although, and I'd echo Bob's comment there, although we hope for and look forward to funding through grants and other possibilities, whether from the federal government or elsewhere as we go forward, it's the responsibility of the board of directors as the body responsible for the financial health of the organization to ensure that we have a budget or a budget which represents both the a realistic estimate of the expenditure needed to fund the activities that we want to do, and on the income side, sufficient revenue to be able to cover that proposed expenditure. And it's our belief that a reliance on just grant funding is unrealistic, and that we have to find some way of funding the organization going forward, hence the discussion we've had over the last 6 months through a series of meetings both within the Management Council and a series of preliminary presentations to Plenary about the different hypotheses regarding the possible structure of funding, the levels of funding, and the different categories of funding going forward. So the decision regarding the finances for IDSG Incorporated are the responsibility of the Board of Directors, but that said, we want to make sure that in the proposals that we make towards the towards Plenary, that the proposals that we make are ones which are acceptable to the broad membership, are realistic in terms of expectations, and hit the right point in terms of both the types of membership fee-paying categories that we've identified and in terms of the levels of funding that we think could be secured. So that's the basis of my introduction. I will stop here as well for any questions. I leave Bob to moderate that, and if there are any questions, I'll handle those. If not, back to you, Bob, to take into the next section with Kim giving the detailed presentation.
Thank you very much, Peter. So, Kay, do we have do we have questions in the chat room, or do we have little blue hands waving in the air?
Well, I'm not seeing any blue hands, so I'll double check one more time. We've had a couple of comments from Ben Wilson, which actually were directed more to Jeremy, but I can read those. First, Ben had asked, he had a question about the bidding process for ongoing support. Jeremy had said it was a public process, which he understood, and he wanted to make sure that the new entity was able to put this out to bid pursuant to whatever requirements for Virginia-based nonprofits. And Jeremy responded that, any funds coming forward would be put out the FFO for bidders to respond to, and IDSG Inc. and any other eligible entities could bid for that. And of course, their office would select the winner. The last comment from Ben, and this is...
Kate, sorry, just before you go on to the second comment, yes. Maybe I could add another element to Ben's comment. We should be clear also when we talk about ongoing support, there are two distinct issues. There is stuff that NIST and the INSTIC NPO may want to continue providing in terms of ongoing support, whether that's through the pilots, through other research or other facilities. And as Jeremy rightly points out, that would go through the standard sort of federal funding opportunities for bidders to respond to. The second element, though, which Jeremy hasn't covered, and in a way rightly so, is the board of directors of the new incorporated body, in its overall assessment of its needs, may well need to look at the issue of ongoing support, also in terms of whether it's secretarial, information technology and administration, also its own research needs, committee support and everything else. And when I talk about the transition, there's aspects of that transition where we will be indeed shifting responsibility from the INSTIC National Program Office onto the shoulders of the new board to take responsibility for the funding there.
Yeah, and just this is Jeremy. I just posted a comment back to Ben. To be clear, what we're talking about from our side is resources that would supplement those resources that are available through membership fees. So, Ben was asking, he would expect that once the organization is weaned, the board would then choose, how to, spend its resources on its own, and that is our long-term goal. But what we're seeing right now is that the organization would benefit from additional supplemental resources on top of those that can actually be provided through membership fees or other privately raised funds that could help to make the group essentially more productive and help accelerate the pace of activity. That's really what we're talking about here. So this would be, another supplement that would support another couple years of work with an effort to really, be focused on how to drive framework deliverables.
So,
right, indeed.
Jeremy,
and the point that Ben made quite rightly as well about conflict of interest rules, we have, and I think we've already shared that with the plenary at the last meeting, in the draft bylaws that the new board will be expected to adopt. There is a conflict of interest policy, and our legal counsel has been through that with us in terms of ensuring that any decisions made by the future board of directors are entirely compatible with a clear separation of responsibilities of members sitting around the table as members of the board of directors of the IDSG Incorporated, and with the interests of that organization solely in mind, even if the individual members of that board of directors in their day job have other responsibilities, which can include also federal, state, or other branches of public sector government, as well as our own private sector interests. And the issue of having a conflict of interest rules and policy in place is precisely to ensure those protections are met.
So I would like to add a little bit to this discussion, and also to ask Jeremy a question. So today, the activities of the IDESG Unincorporated Association are supported by the Secretariat, Trusted Federal Systems, under a grant from the NPO. Going forward, I can see at least three different possible options. The first is that the secretarial functions are brought in-house. The second is that they are continued to be provided by TFS. And the third is that they are contracted to another entity. Now, in the case where the Board of Directors chooses not to bring these functions in-house, I can further see at least two different options in terms of funding during the transitional period that Jeremy is talking about. One is that IDESG Inc. itself, the new incorporated entity, could apply for a grant to allow it to support its operations, either by contracting a third-party entity or by bringing the things in-house. The other is that that the NPO could issue a grant in the way that it has to TFS in the current circumstances to support the activities of the IDESG. And so, Jeremy, I don't know whether you at the NPO have decided or even discussed which of those two mechanisms might be used to provide funding for the sort of secretariat-style activities in the future. But if you have a comment about that whole set of issues, I'd be happy to hear it.
Sure. So, and I have to be a little careful as we're, sort of in, what we consider a pre-procurement phase in terms of, saying too much. But I think at a high level, the expectation from the government is that things like secretariat services and other things that are necessary to, I guess if you throw them in the bucket of keeping the lights on, things like supporting this webcast, ought to be supported by the members. The original concept behind the MPO funding, the grant that helped create the IDSG was that we would be completely out of providing financial support to the organization within 2 years. I think, from our perspective, we've amended or evolved our views a little bit to recognize that, even if this group, raises, let's just call it a significant gob of money to not only continue to, that allows the level of support that you've seen from TFS to continue, and perhaps even more, it would still benefit from having additional resources to be able to, essentially further coordinate activities that advance the identity ecosystem framework. And so I would almost look at, the two buckets of money in terms of there's keeping the lights on, and then there's advancing the framework. From our perspective, it's a lot easier to make the case that the government should be making investments to advance the framework, but it's much harder to make the argument that we should be keeping the lights on after the initial 2 years. Does that make sense?
That is very helpful. That was exactly what I was hoping to hear from you. Thank you.
And to actually quote, I won't say who, other than somebody much higher up in Commerce than I. When we were talking about this several months ago, I think that the message that what they said is, listen, the private sector has to show that they're taking this seriously enough that they're willing to step up and really start to take leadership. Not only in participating but also in providing the funds to drive this organization forward. So if they can raise enough money to do that and truly spin off being independent from the government, as opposed to this sort of quasi-government funded but yet private organization that we've been so far for the first 14, 15 months. When the private sector actually steps up and makes that commitment, it provides a much greater justification for the Commerce Department to then come in with additional funds to try and accelerate its efforts. It's considered a new phase of the public-private partnership that's a little different and much more private sector driven than the initial phase.
Thank you. So, Kay, do we have any additional, by the way, if you have a question, again, please either type it into the chat window at the bottom of your screen or go down to the lower left and go to the little blue man icon and click on the arrow next to him, and that will allow you to select a version of him that has his hand up in the air, and Laura will send you directions on how to get into the audio channel for the purpose of asking your question. Kay, do we have any additional questions either for Jeremy or for Peter at this point?
No, we do not. Ben Wilson said thanks. So,
and thanks very much to Ben for his questions. I think the answers to those questions were very helpful and timely. So without then further ado, and y'all are of course free to continue to ask questions of the speakers who have already given their presentations either in the chat room or by raising your hand. But while we await your input, let's move along and pass the microphone to Kim Little, and Kim is going to no longer keep us in suspense. She's going to give us the details of what the current draft proposal is for membership fees and for expenditures and the financial structure in general of the incorporated entity. Kim, are you on the line?
I am.
And I can hear you. So welcome. Thank you for doing a presentation for us here today, and take it away.
So hi, I'm Kim Little, and I am a Management Council delegate. I'm representing the Identity and Attribute Provider. This is not a proposal that's from the Identity and Attribute Provider. It's from the Management Council subcommittee that was focused on the business sustainability needs of our organization. And so when the Management Council appointed the Business Plan Subcommittee, one of the things that we had to look at, as you all heard, was around the whole need for the revenue component. And so this is not new information. We've been fortunate enough to be able to share this through many plenaries as it was developing. But what we will kind of review again is the organization fees and dues structure that we've laid out that tries to align with some of the needs that we have identified from the budget projections. And so the report was made to the fourth plenary meeting in May, and we've received many comments and tried to modify our structure as a result of the comments. Next slide. The fee schedule was presented to the fifth plenary in July as well. And this slide that you're seeing right now is the, okay, they're kind of moving around. You can go to the next slide, that's okay.
Sorry, I don't know why it's doing that.
That's all right. You're just trying to keep me on my toes. So yeah, if you go to the next slide, though, that shows kind of the budget, one of the set of feedback that we received from several people was we should not be trying to develop a due structure without any budgetary requirements, and we agree 100%. So what we did was we worked with the Secretariat as they helped us identify 3 options for how the budget would at a high level. And so that also has been shared at the earlier plenaries. So there is kind of like a, so the expenses where, a lower, a moderate, and a higher option, depending on the amount of support that we need as an organization. So do we need, a full-time person working to help with all of the marketing and communications needs? Do we need an IT resource? Those types of things showed up in the budget section. We also then, early in the process, started identifying organizations that we could look at how their fee structures were set out, how their organization operated, and we used those as kind of some of the guidelines, understanding that there are many things that are unique about the IDSG from a constituent standpoint because we are a very, very diverse organization. Next slide, please. So this just kind of shows you, again, our membership by type. We have academic institutions that are a part of our membership. We have commercial entities of all sizes that are a part of our membership, meaning that we have 2-person organizations and 20,000-person organizations. We have government agencies that represent more at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level. We have individuals, which are a large portion. You see a fourth of our membership is individuals. And we have nonprofit organizations, again, at varying sizes, ranging from, again, 2 to 3 people to very large organizations in the tens of thousands. Okay. Next slide. Okay, so hopefully this is not too much of an eye chart for you. You can make your screen full size, I think. Let me see if I can do that on mine. Yeah, so if you make your screen full size, this will not hurt your eyes as much. But there are basically 7 categories of the membership fee schedule. So we have individual contributors, academic institutions, nonprofit, non-government, nonprofit organizations broken down by size of organization, federal, state, local, and for-profit companies that are broken down by the size. I will say that one of the things that came up in some of the feedback earlier was, should we use employee breakdowns or should we use revenue breakdowns for the nonprofits and the for-profits? And so there was some difficulty in trying to use revenue, especially for the nonprofits, because there are a lot of times when grants are earmarked for different purposes. So we just felt that it probably would be easier for us to just break it down by employee. The good news is that the other organizations that we compared ourselves against, pretty much all of them did the exact same thing. They did it based off employee, not based off of revenue. So the next column that you see is the proposed annual fee. And then just to kind of put it in context, I put an organization comparison of 3 organizations that, again, I am not trying to say they are equivalent to the IDESG in terms of what they do or how their membership base is based off of. But these should be organizations that people are fairly familiar with and do have some similarities. So OASIS, the Open ID Foundation, and Kantara. The other thing I did to try to give a little help was to say whether what they propose as their fee is higher than our proposed annual fee, lower, or not sure. And so if you see the reddish pink kind of color, that means that what their membership fee is higher. So, for example, the individual contributor, we're proposing that the annual fee is $100. And OASIS is, depending on the different membership levels, $310 to $1,250. The Open ID Foundation, so that's in red because it's higher. The Open ID Foundation is $25, so it's lower, so it's in green. And Kantara is $150, and that's in red because that's higher. So that's the way you would read this. So as you can see, depending on the academic institution, we have different colors, and there is one little error. We've made a change in our graph, and we didn't get one of the colors highlighted. So the academic institution, we have $1,000, and the Open ID Foundation is also $1,000. So it's kind of neutral. So it says it's red, that they're higher, but they're actually just kind of neutral. So, but as you can see, comparing the membership fees to the different organizations, it just varies. We try to really look at finding a middle ground, or one that the representatives on the management council, and especially in the subcommittee that I chaired, could work with, that they felt was, I guess, representative or acceptable possibly for their constituents. We also made sure that any specific feedback that came in, and we had a lot of different types of feedback that came in from the plenary. Some people said, I want to make sure that everybody pays their fair share. There were comments that said, what about the amount of work I put in? Shouldn't that account towards my membership fees? We think that there's definitely the need to be able to have, some type of scholarship or there's going to be some one-on-one type of scenarios that come up throughout this whole process. So we hope that this is something that when we break out our membership categories and the annual fees, and we're hoping that at least 60% of our existing members would convert to being paying members. It would be wonderful if 100% would, but we base the modeling at least off of a 60% conversion rate, and that did help us get to pretty much where we needed to be from a revenue need standpoint for the organization. Okay, I'm going to take this out of full screen mode so I can make sure I can see comments as they come in. So I'll just walk through again just the annual fee amounts by category just to make sure that we're all on the same page. But individual contributor, $100. An academic institution or association, $1,000. And then the non-governmental, non-profit organizations and the for-profit companies are following the same structure at this time, but it's the employee size that makes the difference. So 1 to 5 employees is $250, 6 to 25, $1,000, 26 to 100, $2,500, 101 to 1,000, $5,000, 1,001 to 10,000, $10,000, and more than 10,000, $15,000. One other piece of feedback was that we received from some of the larger organizations is that even if they have 10,000 employees, it doesn't mean that that is the focus of the IDSG would be representative of that large of a company. It could be a small division of a large company that has the focus and the interest and the contribution that would be needed for the IDESG. So that was an interesting piece of feedback that we would also received. We do have amounts for the federal government agencies of $2,500, state government $1,000, and local $500. So that is the full structure. And in the earlier or in the last plenary meeting, one of the things that was shared with, from the plenary was that you wanted to have the opportunity to be able to kind of have a discussion about this proposed membership fee. So I welcome any questions, comments, feedback. Are there any other slides, Kay?
No. That's okay. The end of your slides. You do have a comment or question from Ben Wilson. Can you, I don't know if you're able to see that in the general chat.
Kim and Kay, this is Peter. I just had a couple of additional comments to make, if I may, before we take Ben's point, and it might actually partly answer Ben's point. The additional points are we're looking at this, obviously, and want to have the new board of directors make a recommendation on this as soon as possible. And we're probably looking to, and we've said in our filings that we will follow a financial year running from 1st of January through end of December. However, I think there are a number of points which may need to be taken into account in the first year of operation. Firstly, any membership fees that we agree may not actually be due as of 1st of January in this first year. It may be it's only on the 1st of July. In other words, we may be looking for only a part-funded first year in terms of the funding that's necessary, given the fact that there is still funding through the NPO and Trusted Federal Systems, and the fact that we need to ramp up membership, and it's unrealistic to expect the fees to be due 1st of January. So that's one mitigating issue. A second one, which a number of people have raised, and we have to deal with cautiously, and it's maybe incautious of me just to throw that out to the plenary, but the question about whether in the first year what fees could be reduced or waived for some organizations who are struggling to get the funding approval within their organizations for paying a membership fee to IDSG in their own internal financial and budget cycles. So I think that we as a board will have to be sensitive to the issue that in that first year again of funding, it will also be transitional in that aspect. And then the third element, which I think Kim's rightly highlighted, is that the board of directors will have to adopt a formal budget before the end of the year for 2014, and that detailed budget looking at what our expenditure centres are going to be, our cost centres are going to be, as well as what our revenue possibilities are, will have to be relatively realistic. And my hope is that we will, as a new board, have that budget approved in such a way that we can present the sort of detailed budget to the plenary in January. I just wanted to add those additional elements because, there are rightly some questions about how we transition into fully funded and full flow. And it's clear that in the first year there's going to be, again, some bumps in terms of getting up to full speed and having all members on board and paying whatever the level of fees that we do agree. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Kim, if you're there, I believe Ben had the first question asking a little bit about how the tiers have been organized. I don't know if you want to say the question for folks who aren't online and then respond with whatever information you have.
Yeah, I'm just going to read exactly what it says. So Ben's question was, when he looked at the fee schedule, he thought there was a steep jump at entities with more than 100 employees. I realized the goal benefit of keeping the table simple with fewer levels, but was there consideration for tiers from 100 to 200, 500, up to 1,000? His second comment was, maybe the proposed annual fee could then be increased. Alternatively, of course, those entities could be encouraged to provide additional support in the way of sponsorship, which many already do. So in terms of the tiers, again, were pretty consistent with the way that a lot of other organizations kind of looked at it. We definitely could have a very, very granular process, but our actual membership didn't look like those individuals. We had let me step back again. We had the MPO assist us with looking at the demographics of our organizational members. And we tried to build buckets around how our members were also grouped. And so they did a pretty exhaustive study of the 200 plus organizations, breaking them out by nonprofit, for-profit, governmental, academic, and others, individual especially, and then tried to break down all of the revenue breakouts, all of for the organizations that were either public, and if they were private, if they did have information that they shared, as well as the employee breakout. So that is partially why we have that bucket of 101 to 1,000. and same thing with the bucket of 1,001 to 10,000. So some of the buckets, where the biggest concerns, and we had previously even fewer buckets than that. We had 1 to 100 as a bucket, but there are some very unique things about those smaller organizations, and I learned a lot from talking to a lot of the entrepreneurs that are a part of IDSG and some of the smaller nonprofits about the extreme differences between a 2-person and a 10-person organization. And some of those things I myself would not have even understood because I've always worked for a larger company. I guess I don't have much of an entrepreneurial spirit or something, I don't know. But so then you're right. There probably are other ways for us to do those breakouts, but we didn't see ultimately the value in being able to manage a complicated schedule. So I hope that answers your question. The second one is from Stuart Shapiro. What's the rationale? What's the rationale for identical fee structures for non-government and for-profit? He suspects that if the schedule is implemented, we see many non-governments depart the IDSG, seriously compromising its legitimacy from privacy and civil liberty standout. Again, it was really driven by the size of the organization more than anything, and the point that the for-profit organizations, if they're a 10,000-person for-profit organization, does not necessarily mean that that many employees are focused even on identity-related or identity ecosystem-related issues. So we felt that, again, the breakouts, and this was, again, consistent with several of the other organizations that we looked at, that they either didn't break out so like, for example, Open ID Foundation, they have a blanket approach that if you are a non-profit, you pay $100. But there are some very large nonprofits that make a lot of money that go towards, now, I got to be careful how I say that, they have a large amount of revenue that they use to do their efforts that are part of their directive. So that's the current reason, but that doesn't mean that that's not something that's open for discussion. But we felt that the employee breakout was probably the most effective method that we were able as a subcommittee to come up with.
So Kim, thanks for that answer, and I do want to amplify something that you just said, and that is, Stuart, if you feel that there is a justification for a different treatment of certain kinds of nonprofit entities, particularly those with missions that are aligned with the NSTIC principles, that's part of the reason we're having this call. That feedback, with possibly a set of alternative mechanisms that might be adopted, is something that we're definitely looking to have directed to the Management Council as they move forward with making their decisions about the structure.
Yeah, also as you can see, again, Kantara did the same thing where they have one blanket fee for non-profit, non-governmental entities. But OASIS did not. They broke theirs out. So, there's just, there wasn't one, method that we thought was the most appropriate, but this is, the opportunity for us to get feedback, from our plenary.
Okay, are there additional questions for Kim at this time?
Well, Kathy Tilton asked the question, did I miss when the fees would go into effect? Peter has provided a response in the general chat, saying that is a separate decision that has to be made. I don't know if anyone would like to speak to Kathy's question.
Well, I think Peter already has spoken, at least in part, to Kathy's question, right? So there is some issue surrounding the amount of lead time that is necessary, particularly for larger organizations, to get the authorization to pay a membership fee. There's also, the sequencing of rollover of membership agreements to the new organization. So there's still some issues associated with that, and I think what Peter said was that the Management Council and the Board of Directors are going to have to exercise some sensitivity to the roll-off from the public funding to the self-sustainment fee-based funding, and I suspect, and Peter will correct me if I'm wrong, that the details of that are still being discussed. But I mean, Peter, do you want
no decision as yet?
Would it be irrational exuberance to point to sort of a quarter or 1 or 2 quarters in which we might expect fees to start coming online?
Right. So again, I'm just speaking to Kathy's further question and clarification. This is my own point of view, but we've had some initial discussions, but no formal deliberation or decision on this. One scenario could be that the membership agreement, in other words, transitioned to IDSG Incorporated, takes effect on the 1st of January 2014, and within that membership agreement, by signing it, members are saying, we agree to be bound by the terms of this agreement, including, as I mentioned, the one element which is that there may be future membership fees to be paid as part of your continuing membership. That's the first element. So what we may do for 2014 is say, okay, we are realistic that we're not going to be able to start charging 1st of January. We're realistic that we may not be able to spend money as of 1st of January as a new corporation. So it might be more realistic to say for 2014 it will be considered as a part year in terms of both funding and in terms of expenditure, and although we will present a budget for the whole year, it's recognized that the expenditure and the fees expected only represent maybe half or 2/3 or some proportion of that year, and as such the fees actually charged for members in that first year would only be a proportion of the proposed annual fee. So just to clarify, Kathy, it's not so much that we would only start charging in July but then charge you for a whole year. Under that scenario, we would say, okay, fees will become due on 1st of July, and we're only going to charge you 50% of the total amount for the first year. That is one possible approach. The second element, which I mentioned, and maybe it's complementary, it may be an alternative, is to say we recognize for the first year that many organizations may have problems ponying up the money for the first full year, and that what we propose is a sort of case-by-case waiver or a block waiver based on certain criteria, where we say, given the fact that you may have problems in introducing the fee proposal for your organization within your own organization's budget cycles, you will get a first year and a 1 year only waiver or reduction of your fees to allow you to be able to join as a full member, but without having to incur that cost in the first year. So those are just two ideas. I don't think there's nothing etched in stone yet, but the reason I mention them is that the board, as you rightly pointed out, Bob, is the board is sensitive to the fact that this transition year may be difficult. And to Ben's point about sooner invoices go out the better, plenty of time to make payment, that's true, but in many organizations an invoice can only go out on the basis that it's charged against a budget line which has already been approved internally. So in that sense, what we want to try and do is, as soon as possible, agree what the schedule is. If there is an agreement that fees only kick in, for example, on 1st of May or 1st of July or some other period for the rest of the year, and it's proportionate to the rest of the year, yes, we could get that agreement early on and have people aware of that, so that indeed invoicing can be done early on, so that people have that lead time to get things done. But all of those, as I say, are operational aspects, the main concern from the board is to ensure that that we address the inevitable bumpy road of that first year of transition, and that we have some thought given to the mechanisms for addressing that.
So thanks, Peter, and I want to ask all y'all to focus on this discussion. Okay, so the members of the plenary, the Management Council is asking for your feedback on this proposal. This is an area that isn't settled yet, and one of the reasons that it isn't settled yet is because Peter, to the best of my knowledge, is not a mind reader, and so he is not going to be able to know all of the difficulties that you might experience in terms of getting your organization to approve payment of fees. So one of the very, very helpful items of feedback that you will be able to provide the Management Council during the comment interval here is, how your budget cycle works, whether you can get fees paid in the middle of a budget cycle or whether you need to get them approved for next year expenditure only, how long you need to get things approved, what kind of details you need to get things approved. So things that can inform the Management Council and the Board of Directors about what makes it easiest for you to pay or for your organization to pay a membership fee will be extraordinarily helpful information as we go forward during the comment period. And so if you could, take a note to yourself, to maybe dig into that a little bit and provide feedback, I think that would be an extremely productive use of our time. Okay, do we have additional questions?
Well, Ben Wilson had a comment. Peter sort of touched on it, but just to make sure everybody hears it, Ben Wilson says, I think the sooner that invoices go out, the better, with plenty of time to make payment. That way you can start getting money in. Why delay it for the big entities? Most budgets are being set now.
And this is Kim. I would just comment that it would be why delay it for all entities, right? Because a lot of budgets, regardless of the size of the organization, are being set and planned for 2014 if they have not already been set. So that's a really valid point. The biggest piece of it, though, was that we definitely got the general feedback from the plenary that you wanted to have some discussion around this first, and so we did not want to put out a fee structure without giving the opportunity for some discussion.
Yeah, and I think the wisdom of that has been proven out by comments that we've had today. I think we will be receiving substantive items of feedback. Any other questions in the chat window?
Bob, there's no question in the chat room except that both Stuart and I think Herbert Leitold did both raise the issue of the fact that under this fee schedule, the charter fees for not-for-profits and for-profit organizations is the same. I think Kim answered that, at least partly, this issue about, about the central focus, particularly in for-profit organizations, that they may not be entirely, their whole organization may not be focused on work that's related to IDSG. And indeed, that point could also be made for many not-for-profit organizations that some of whom are very active with us at the moment, that their core business is not in the area of online trust and identity, it's elsewhere, and it's only part of their organization. So the same point could be made for both. What I would like to get a sense of, either from Kim or from comments or people taking the floor, is this, to Stuart's point, is this such an issue that we do risk fall off in support from particularly the non-profit sector if it's very visible that the not-for-profits are charged the same as for-profit organizations? Because if there is really a sense, and that may be the case, that this is a problematic issue, then indeed both the Management Council and the new board would have to ask Kim's subcommittee and for sort of the number crunching to look at a differentiation that takes that into account. I don't have a clear view on that, particularly in the U.S. Not-for-profit doesn't mean you don't make money. It just doesn't mean that you can have profit making as part of your core objective. And in the way many not-for-profits are organized, they are organized in very similar ways as for-profit organizations. So I understand that's partly behind the reason of not making such a strong distinction. But I would like to hear points about whether, other points of view about whether this is a potential danger area that we ought to take into account in more detail.
Yeah, I agree with, well, let me start out. Peter, I agree with you that this is an issue that is sufficiently important that we need to fully understand it before we move forward. And I would ask Stuart. So I think I think everybody would agree that that there's a clear rationale for the proposal that Kim advances, but that doesn't mean that there aren't also other kinds of proposals which have equally clear rationales and which might be wiser either for reasons of perception or for reasons of substance. So, Stuart, if there's a specific alternative structure with a rationale for it, which you think would be wiser, I think it would be really good to get the specifics of that into the hands of the Management Council via the discussion mechanism that we'll talk about in a minute. But I also think that it's a good idea to more generally for the rest of the audience to respond to Peter's request for additional discussion of this.
So this is Kim. What's really important to me in all scenarios, as everybody who knows me, I'm a numbers person, right? So I like to look at quantifying what the issue is before we ever get started in anything. And again, that was the reason why we asked the NPO to go and help us with the demographics of the organization. One thing I'd like for everybody to understand is the way that our non-government, nonprofit organizations fall out from a size standpoint versus our for-profit organizations. That's a really critical thing to know. So we have approximately 30, 40, 50 nonprofit, non-governmental organizations. And of those 50, about 75% of them fall in the actually, I'm going to say about 50% of them fall in the less than 100 people category. And then the next big bucket is 101 to 1,000. There's probably about 90% of, or 80% of all of the organizations are less 1,000 or less. So that versus our for-profit organizations is the almost opposite. The majority of them are 1,000 or larger, 1,000 employees or larger. So I think that piece of it is a really interesting thing to understand because it tells you where on that scale they're going to fall out in. So I just wanted to put that piece into perspective because that does change the way that when we're looking, we're not talking about a really large number of nonprofits that are in those two big bottom tiers. We're talking about the exact opposite situation. We do actually have no organizations that we actually had identified, so this could be incorrect, but we have none that we identified that were non-government, non-profit organizations with over 10,000 employees. There might be one that should be listed there at least, but we have right now, we have a 0 in that bucket, whereas we have many that are in the 1,000 to 10,000 employees and more than 10,000 for the for-profits.
We did have an additional comment. Are you ready for me to read that, Bob?
Yes, please do.
John McTaggart asks, there was some discussion at the last plenary about information being available to justify the expense we submit to our companies. Is this available? Peter Brown offered a chat, but I thought I would throw that open if there were others who wanted to respond. Yeah, this is Kim. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think this one's for you, Kim.
I'm sorry?
I said I was just going to say, I think this question is for you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I agree 100%. Kathy Tilton just also put a comment that said it's not just a budget, it's a value proposition, and that's 100% correct. But where we left off from our subcommittee was that once we had come up with all of the, more numbers and everything else, the final thing that we had on our list was really getting that value proposition laid out so that people could say, for the $500 that I'm going to be paying, this is what we are trying to, this is what the IDSG brings to me. This is what our organizational value proposition is. And a lot of this has to do with the efforts that we have embarked on with the strategic planning initiative and working with the outside firm to help us get some of those talking points together. So what we ultimately need to be able to provide our membership is not just this is how much you're going to have to pay, but here is a full packet that says here's what we stand for. There's going to be a sales effort, that many of the members of the plenary have to take back to their organizations or as individuals have to kind of think through and justify their involvement, and we understand that. So that piece is not 100% done at this point.
Okay, do we have any other questions or comments in the line, or anybody with blue hands up?
No blue hands up. No more comments. I was trying to see if anyone else is typing.
While we're waiting, I would just say that, so please, everyone, think of this as an iterative process as we're trying to put together those membership packets that, we want to know that we have the fee structure set up so that it is palatable. We want to then also make sure that we have all the necessary additional items that you need to be able to link that membership fee schedule back with what that value proposition is. And so while we're talking specifically this moment about the membership fees, we're not overlooking all the things that you would need to be able to present to your organization, or if you are the leader of the organization, for you to make that decision.
So, Kim, could you say a few words about the schedule for producing those deliverables and how you anticipate bringing them forward?
All right, so this is not one of those pass the buck kind of things, but I'm kind of passing the buck on that one. This is not actually the membership subcommittee. The membership subcommittee, I just made up a committee. The business plan subcommittee kind of pushed that, some of that effort over to the communications committee and then in general to the larger management council to help make those final steps. This will be an effort. This is an all-hands-on-deck kind of thing. We need the secretariat support, the MPO support. So I don't have a time schedule for that effort, but that is something that is still being crafted.
I'm happy to help you.
So, Peter,
there.
Yes. So, Peter, if you could say a few words about the process going forward for that.
Yeah. I say this under the sort of proviso again that the new board has not yet met, so it's up to the new board to decide this. But the way things are looking is what we have in front of us and what we've had today are all of the recommendations from Kim's business planning subcommittee to the management council, which the management council has broadly endorsed, with that request in response to plenary request to ensure that this is further socialized with plenary and that we discuss in further detail. The next steps, as far as I see it, is we have the inaugural meeting, the first formal meeting of the new board next week, where we have to elect our officers, where we have to establish the responsibilities for secretariat duties, financial, budgeting, bank accounts, all the sort of messy stuff that is necessary in the startup of a corporation. But what I want to do, and I've been very clear about this, is work together with the NPO and the Secretariat to ensure that we have a series of decisions made by the new board that we can present to the plenary in January, which I hope will cover the proposed budget for 2014, the fee schedule, and the definitive set of agreements that allow, in full transparency, the plenary to see what is being proposed in their name for the new corporation. So that is going to, it's a relatively tight timetable, but we're looking at, in terms of the schedule of meetings, I think it's doable. The question is just having the formal meetings of the new board of directors who have to take the responsibility for this, making sure that those items are on the agenda for the forthcoming meetings. And to the extent that I can, in my current role as chair of the Management Council, and on the basis that the new board elects its officers and that I may be one of those, the only commitment I can make is to say that that is what I would like to see done, and I would hope that the new board takes on.
And Peter, just to be clear, the package that you described is also going to include the value proposition document and the strategic plan?
I skipped over that very quickly. I mean, alongside the discussions we're having here, Jim Barnett, and he may want to chip in on this if he's on the line, his subcommittee within the Management Council, which has been driving a lot of the work that we've done and that we presented in detail at the last plenary on the sort of strategic communications planning and messaging for the organization. He has worked since then further with the external consultants that we brought in, and the objective is indeed to bring these things to a head also at the January plenary. So the objective should be, if not a big bang, then certainly not a whimper, that the Atlanta plenary meeting would be not just a sort of de facto, but a very realistic sort of launch of IDSG Incorporated, where we're looking both at the functional organizational aspects like the budget and the funding and the structure of the organization going forward, but also at those policy aspects of the value proposition, our strategic plan, our goals for 2014. So what we're trying to do is to make sure that all happens in a time frame that we can bring that to Atlanta in January.
And so to summarize it really quickly, essentially what we're hoping to be able to put before the membership is more or less a full prospectus that could be given to management of potential member organizations,
right, that's a good way to put it,
the cost and values. Okay, I think that's very helpful. Kay, do we have other questions, comments, or people in the queue?
Ben Wilson asked about the ability to comment in the discussion forum if you're a non-member, which Laura has answered. But if I could, with your permission, just announce a little bit about what is on the slide there. We have recorded the plenary. We will be posting it online. We'll also be posting the chat discussion here today. And then the discussion forum will be opened after this. And you can go to the IDESG, the idecosystem.org website, go to the tab on discussion forum. You'll see this topic. You do not have to be a member of the IDSG actually to participate in the discussion forum. So all the things that have been said here, if people would go in and make their comments and offer their suggestions for, better ways to do things, or, things that need to be done or whatever, that would be terrific. We're going to leave that open for a little more than 2 weeks. So that discussion forum is open for comments through December 6th. And in terms of timing, next week the new board of directors for the IDSG Incorporated will be meeting, and then they will likely have another meeting after the comment period so that they have a chance to go through and see, take in all the feedback that people provide. So all of that will be happening, next month as well, in preparation for bringing all the things we've discussed to the January plenary. The links are posted on the webpage for those of you who are online, so you can see it. Thank you. I just wanted to...
And are there other comments or questions, Kay?
Ben Wilson says, okay, he understands that you don't have to be a member to post a comment. I'm wondering about issues going forward. There will likely be people who want to participate without paying dues.
So it is canonically the case that any member of the public may attend our meetings and may even address our meetings at the discretion of the plenary chair. And to my knowledge, with the exception of the New World Order guy, we've never denied anyone entry to any of our meetings. So it's certainly, as long as I'm in the chair, it will be possible for people who have an interest in the subject matter of the IDESG to make their interests and concerns known to us in the meetings without becoming members. And I am hopeful and confident that the majority of people who do attend meetings will see the benefits that are going to be enumerated in the value proposition document that Peter just discussed and will choose to become members. Do we have other questions or comments, Kay?
Peter Brown was typing.
Yeah, Peter, you, if you would like to say something, you can do that. Otherwise, if you're typing something,
no, thanks. I mean, I did put it in the chat, but it's true there are some people who don't see that. I think that Ben does raise an interesting point, and I think you've addressed it well. What I've said in the chat is essentially, that these sort of organizations have two types of approach in terms of if you like, core business model. It's the so-called, pay-to-view model or the pay-to-play model. In the pay-to-view model, anybody can take part, but the results of the work are more locked down, and if you want to use them or even to access them, you have to pay to get the definitive documents, which is very much the sort of de jure standards organization's approach. The other approach is the sort of pay-to-play model, where you're saying, well, everything is open and available and anybody can access anything, but if you really want to influence stuff, then get to the table. And that may be meaning putting a check, however small, on the table, but by participating as an active member, you're actually putting some skin in the game. You're saying, okay, I'm not standing on the sidelines and just sort of yelling my point and hoping that somebody picks it up and runs with it, but by being a member, I'm at the same table as everybody else, involved actively in the deliberations and influencing the work. And I would say maybe a semantic detail distinguishing between participating and influencing, but the difference for me is anybody can comment and contribute as a member of the public. Whether that contribution or comment is taken anywhere and taken into account, I think is related to being an active a member and actually putting your money where your mouth is, as we say in England, and actually committing to getting involved and to be able to influence things. And I think that's an important distinction.
Yeah, and I'll add my spin to that too, right? So the reason that you pay a membership fee to IDESG is not so that you are allowed into the room for the discussions. You pay a membership fee to the organization because you believe that what the organization is trying to do is important to our society, and you think that it is important enough that you're willing to contribute financial resources to ensure that the organization continues to exist as a discussion and action forum long enough for that work to be completed. And ultimately, the measure that the NSTIC NPO will hold us to is the same as the measure that the public and we ourselves will hold us to, namely, do we believe in this enough, in the importance of it enough that we will put money into it to ensure that the organization exists long enough to get its job done.
And another element on that, which is to Ben's point about do we need to define a forum where non-members can provide input. I mean, it may well be the case in the course of our work that some issue comes up, and we've already seen that with, for example, the discussions around anonymity and pseudonymity. It may be that we say, well, we don't have people in the room that are really expert in this particular issue, and they may, for whatever reasons, decide they don't want to be members. But that doesn't stop us as an organization to reaching out and saying, okay, for a particular piece of work, we actually do want to provide a forum, a safe space, whatever we want to, whatever is appropriate for reaching out to a particular constituency of people or interest to say, we really need your input, and we're looking and we think your input would be valuable for a particular piece of work, and we're prepared to put something up, put something in place that allows you to do that. And that allows precisely a mode for active participation where that really helps drive the thing forward without having to get people to sign on the dotted line because they may not be interested in the broader agenda that IDSG is attempting to address. Maybe that also addresses the point that Peter Altman just raised, and Kay, if I may, I'll read that as a Mike, which is, that he agrees about the public good rationale, and the question is whether there is a sufficient business case for joining and paying a membership fee, and that's what we have in order to justify a budget request. And I think I would hope that my comment sort of goes a bit towards that indeed there may not always be a sufficient business case for joining and paying a membership fee because your interest as an organization, as a pressure group, as an advocacy group, as a business may not be central to and aligned with the general concerns of IDSG, and yet you have something to say and you think it's important. And it's in that context that I think as part of our future communications and outreach work, we are aware of such constituencies and where there isn't a suitable then overlap between an organization's interests and IDSG's interests and goals, that we provide such forum for considered discussion and input from other interested parties.
Thank you, Peter. And I take it that Peter Alterman's comment has been addressed unless Peter Alterman chooses to inform us that it hasn't. Are there any other comments? Okay.
No, Peter Alterman says okay here, and no one else is typing. There are no other comments.
Okay, well then I will take the microphone back and just give you all a summary of how the process plays out from here. So as Kay has already mentioned, the Secretariat will be opening a discussion forum for the purpose of gathering input on the fee structure and the specifics of the fees at the conclusion of this meeting. The comment period begins immediately when you hang up the phone from this meeting, and it lasts until 5 p.m. Eastern Time on December 6th. The comments are to be submitted to the item which is open for this purpose on the IDESG discussion forum page. Kate, since I'm not on the web channel, do we have the URL for that up on the screen right now?
Laura had put it in the chat. I'll ask Laura to republish that again.
Okay. So please do submit your thoughts and comments and criticisms and suggested modifications to the discussion forum before December 6th. It is actually very important that any comments you have be received in a timely fashion because, as Peter has noted, we're doing a little bit of a dance with the clock on this one to ensure that all of the activities of creating the incorporated entity and installing board members and having a board meeting and so forth take place in a timely fashion. And the new board of directors, being the organization which is legally responsible for fiduciary obligations of the company, has to make decisions about things like fee structure, and they want to be able to do that with your detailed input in hand. I would particularly commend to your attention the two salient issues that have been raised today. Number one, whether the fee structure for nonprofit organizations is appropriate or needs adjustment. And number two, any details of the, of any difficulties that scheduling of the beginning of the fee period may create for your organization, and any organizational procedures that you may need to engage in order to begin paying fees or to make the decision about joining as a fee-paying member. So those topics will be of particular interest to the Management Council, but anything that, if left unaddressed, might cause you unhappiness should be put into the discussion forum. The way that this is going to proceed is that after receiving all of your input, the board of directors will of the new incorporated entity will make a decision about the fee structure. That's its obligation as the party responsible for fiduciary obligations. It will do that with careful consideration of your input. And Peter, will the decision have been made by the January plenary, or will it be made at a meeting either contemporaneous with or shortly after the January meeting?
I remain an optimist despite life lessons otherwise, and my hope is that we will actually have a decision that we can present to the plenary in January so that we can get this ball rolling. That will be a function of how many meetings we can get in of the new board between now and then, and whether whether there's a lot of detail that we need to take into account or comments from members as a result of this plenary presentation and the discussion forum that follows. We will also have a face-to-face meeting of the board, which will be the first face-to-face meeting of the new board in Atlanta. So that may be the last opportunity we get to be able to decide something before presenting to plenary. But that's my hope. We'll just have to see whether that is indeed a victory of hope over experience.
Okay, thank you, Peter. So please do take care to get your comments in by the December 6th at 5 p.m. Eastern Time deadline. And Kay, do we have any more comments or questions in the chat room right now?
No, we do not. Laura reposted the links so people can see those, but that's all.
Okay, so I guess I will, in that case, wrap up the call with a couple of observations. So first, if there are any committee chairs on the call, I recommend that you send an email to your committees noting that this discussion has taken place and sending the link to the chat transcript and to the recording so that people who haven't been able to join us today are able to have a listen and decide whether they need to submit any feedback. Second, I want to thank Kim Little and the Business Planning Subcommittee and the Management Council as a whole for all of the work that they've done on this, and for the frequency and detail of their briefings to the plenary. This, I think, must be the 5th briefing that we've had. And last, I'd like to really thank everybody for the entire year's worth of work. We've made an enormous amount of progress. If you look at the dashboard for committee activities that's up on the IDESG website, if you look at the governance documents, which are now complete, including electronic deliberations, if you look at just a whole variety of activities, the organization is now getting work done in a really efficient fashion. I think we put up with a hurricane and a government shutdown, and a number of organizational issues, and I think that we've come through it in a very strong position. And I want to thank everybody for the diligence and good humor with which you participated in the process. Kay, are there any final comments or questions in the chat room?
No. No more comments.
Okay. That being the case, Well, ladies and gentlemen, I will call the meeting to a close. Thank you for your participation. I look forward, and I'm sure Peter looks forward to all of your feedback in the discussion forum, and let's get this thing done and proceed with the process of standing on our own 2 feet.
Thanks, Bob, for chairing and managing this as well.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Much appreciated.